ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of the Irrational Confidence Podcast. We're talking college football, and it's time. We've gone through the whole journey of college football. We're there. We're to the preseason top 5 teams in the country. These teams are the elite of the elite. They're the best of the best. And I'm joined by the elite of the elite and the best of the best co-host for a podcast. Fresh, how you doing, buddy?
Perhaps it's been a journey, but I think it's actually fitting. It's going to be a great walk down this road of elite football teams and where we think they're going to be and what they have coming into the 2022 season.
So there's been a lot of conversation about the top 5 teams in the country. The funniest thing, though, that I think I've seen out there is anyone that has a different 1, 2, and 3. So I'm not saying the order can't be different, but the top 3 teams are the same top 3 teams regardless. Whoever you're looking at, ESPN, you're looking at CBS, you're looking at Lundy's, whatever, everywhere out there.
Venable sport.
Top 3 teams there. It's 4 and 5 that really have the conversation. So let's get into it. You guys have waited all of this way. You've gone through starting with 25. Now we're down to number 5. Our number 5 team in the country is the Texas A&M Aggies. Ended the season 8-5 last year. Huge win against Bama. But they wound up ending the season unranked. And then the offseason happens. A&M brings in arguably the number 1 recruiting class in the country. Jimbo Fisher and Nick Saban go toe-to-toe in the media, trading barbs at each other. And now it seems like everyone and their brother is super high on the Aggies this year. I know I got questions about the Aggies. I don't know if I'm buying into all of the hype, but I do know that there's a really, really good football team there in College Station. They got a great coach, Jimbo Fisher. He's now been there for over 4 years, which kind of shocked me a little bit. I always kind of think that Jimbo's only in year 2, maybe 3 there. I was kind of shocked to remind myself that he's been there for a little bit now. Fresh, I'll lead it off with you. What do you think? What are you looking at when you see Texas A&M?
I think this team's loaded on paper talent-wise. You look at that 2020 team that they went to the Orange Bowl, beat UNC. Kellen Mond was the quarterback as a 4-year starter. Isaiah Spiller, tons of guys in that roster. And they took advantage of a 10-game schedule and then went from there. They still didn't even play for an SEC championship game. And then 21 was supposed to be their coming out party. The one thing that I thought they were lacking was a quarterback. Defense was absolutely amazing. Up there with Wisconsin, Georgia, Alabama. They were fantastic. That offense, though, had some serious issues, and it really stemmed from that quarterback position and the lack of an explosive passing game, I think, is what you can look at. Calzada, he is the quarterback that beat Alabama, but other than that, was really never there. Isaiah Spiller was the starting running back. He was really the main focus of that offense, but they weren't able to really develop and find explosive plays from somebody else to offset him. This team, coming into this year, I think they know, with the comments that were made during the offseason, with Jimbo coming out and Saban talking about NIL guys and money being paid to players and whatnot, whether, he didn't say anything wrong, and Saban basically didn't accuse anyone else, but everyone else was, there's things going on all over the place. This is the year, though, I think A&M has to actually put up on the field consistently, not just beat Alabama and then fade like they did down the stretch. Beat the teams that aren't Alabama. If you look at the past couple seasons, the big games they show up for. But it's the other teams where they let those bumps in the road get them. And you look at the talent coming in, these guys are all going to have to play immediately. They're not going to be hanging out on the bench because they need these 5-star players to come in and contribute right away to make sure they maximize the time in the window to win. You look at, they signed the number 1 and number 2 defensive ends in the country and the number 1 and number 2 defensive tackles in the country, according to ESPN 300, in Walter Nolan, Gabe Brownlow-Dindy, Labius Overton, and Shamar Stewart. They basically brought together one of the greatest defensive lines potentially assembled in college football history in the same recruiting class. And the thing is, they all weren't from Texas. This is also showing where Jimbo is expanding that recruiting base. You got 2 from Florida and 1 from Georgia. You got 2 of the top 4 receivers in ESPN's 300 as well, trying to expand that offense. You got the number 1 ranked pocket passer in Connor Weigman, not the best quarterback overall, but number 1 pocket passer according to ESPN 300. All these guys are going to have to play. This is like it's kind of like an NFL free agency where NIL's coming in, transfer rules coming in. All these players are showing up and they're going to play immediately. Can they play to their potential right off the bat? That is the biggest question. And you look at right off the very top, they don't have a chance to really slowly get used to college and get accustomed to the speed of play, the expectations. Week 3, they host Miami, 9 o'clock, Kyle Field. Week 4, they get Arkansas in Jerry World. Week 5, at Mississippi State. And then week 6 is the showdown versus Alabama in Tuscaloosa. Honestly, I think Mississippi State is the trap game. You play Miami, which is going to be a team trying to return themselves to glory. Arkansas, natural rival, y'all play in Jerry World every single year. They beat you and they played you tough the past couple seasons. They have a more mature, veteran-laden football team. And then you have Mississippi State. You're going to be looking ahead to Bama the next week. If they come out of that 3-1, I think they're okay. If they come out 2-2 or 1-3, the pressure starts hyping up on Jimbo to figure this out. And like I mentioned earlier, Calzada was the quarterback. He transferred to Auburn. You go out and you bring in Max Johnson from LSU, and in my opinion, the only reason Max Johnson's there because his brother was a 4-star tight end recruit that was going to go to LSU, and I think the package deal to bring him in. Where are they going to get? Is it going to be Weigman? Is it going to be Johnson? If you watch any LSU film last year, Booty was the only guy who really made Johnson look good at an offense really flow. Outside of that, once Booty got hurt, that offense died, and he was not able to manufacture anything. He's a very pocket passer. Yeah, would they have a good running game that might help him? I don't think he's the answer. I think they're going to have to give the keys to Wigman and let Wigman run from it. And really, you could put a freshman now in the full spotlight with this team with so many expectations. It's a lot. And I think they had the talent. They can probably get away with being just themselves and winning some games. But can they go 11-1? Can they go 12-0? That's the real question. It's going to be a lot. I think Jimbo's going to have to do his best coaching because now you've opened your mouth. You've gotten a spat with Nick Saban. Even though Saban kind of actually started it, you continue to keep fueling the fire. You have competition all over the place. We already know A&M is not happy that Texas and Oklahoma are joining the SEC. That was very well evident at the SEC Media Days of 2021 when it was announced. They were kind of irritated because they were trying to leave and get out of Texas' shadow and becoming themselves. And then here comes Texas and Oklahoma a year away from joining them. They've got to win now before those two programs come in and impact even more heavily on their recruiting cycle. I think this team, they can get away in their athletic ability. Will they have the mental fortitude and the toughness to win those games out down the stretch? The target's on their back. They already beat Alabama. They can't creep up on anymore. The SEC West already in itself is very tough. I think this team is going to find a way to navigate. I think this team is going to level them up to expectations. They will not win the SEC West. I picked them to win the SEC West last year. They let me down. I think they go 10-2. They lose to Alabama. I think that's going to happen. They're going to lose to Alabama and Tuscaloosa, and they're going to lose a random game that they shouldn't. They're going to somehow have that bump in the way. It's the way the thing I see the way they have it set up. They're always going to have that one game where they're going to find that bump in the road. Very similar to where Georgia was back, years ago, where you would get so up for the one football game, and you'd have that Vanderbilt, that Kentucky, that one team would just you wouldn't be prepared, you overlook, and you get it. I think that's what it's going to come down to. They're going to be 10-2. They're going to be improved. I think this is going to be a 2023 football team they should be worried about once all these freshmen get settled in. But 2022, I think 10-2 at best, and make it to a New Year's Six bowl and go from there.
Everyone always talks to me, and I've made this point before about what I refer to as SEC biased. People always say, well, what do you mean by SEC biased? Do you mean that you don't consider like the SEC is the best conference or anything like that? And I say, no, it's not what I mean. The 2022 Texas A&M team, that's an example of SEC bias. Because if you look on paper, I think that this team should be good, but when you sit there and you have three guys vying for this quarterback position. Like I said, you said Max Johnson. You talked about the freshman coming in, and you forgot to mention also Haynes King, who got injured week 2 or 3 last year, I believe, and was the starter for the year, and he's only a sophomore. When you're having that big of a quarterback battle this late, and it's not even a 2-horse race. We're talking about a serious 3-horse race going into fall camp. So what are you going to do? You're going to split time with the ones between all 3 of them during the fall camp? I don't really think that that's the best move to do. You want to bring that down to, okay, maybe a 2-person race as well. They got a heck of a running back in David Arcane. Dude might be the fastest guy in college football. They have a lot of, this guy is really, really good, but all those guys have a but. This is where I think that because they have that great win last year, everyone remembers, like, I remember sitting there on my couch last year watching, being riveted about that Alabama A&M game. And it was so back and forth, especially at the end. Then you see what's going on in the media between, and it almost reminds me of, old school pro wrestling between two coaches who are just arguing with each other, and they're building this story. Like, if they would change the football schedule for Alabama and Texas A&M to play every other week, people would tune in just because the two coaches are talking smack to each other. I think 5 is way too high. I think 5 is way too high, especially so we're giving a team that finished 8-4 and completely unranked. We're jumping them all the way up here. Now, that doesn't mean I don't think they're a very, very, very good football team. Yeah, I think 5 is way too high for me. And I know we kind of talked about this as well, but I struggled with this because a lot of the teams, this was when we put this thing together, was before a lot of things happened over at USC, and we both agreed that we were going to leave because it was our preseason ranking. We were going to leave everything as is. Every team behind A&M also has questions. And that's where I think is the really hard part. I think that this team is elevated to that point. And I think that's where the bias kind of comes in, because they want to puff their chest out like they're Alabama. Yeah, you beat Alabama in the regular season, but Alabama played for a national title. You didn't. You want to puff your chest out like you're Georgia. Georgia won the national title last year. You didn't. You want to puff your chest out like LSU. LSU has a national title. You aren't to their level yet. I agree with you, Fresh. This is a 2023 team. This is not a 2022 team. I won't be shocked to see them end up the year 9-3. I look at them to see something very similar to Ole Miss's season last year. I think that they're going to be exciting to watch. I think they're going to be a lot of fun. I think that they're going to have some games where they just beat the living breaks off of people. Like, I'm looking at a game like that Arkansas game, and I think that they could go into Jerry's world and just boat race Arkansas and run them up and down the field. And then the next time you're going to see them lose to a game, and I'm just picking one here, the game versus Florida. Like, it's a game that is almost inexcusable that you lose. Like, on paper, you are a much better team than the Florida Gators. But I don't think this team has come together. This team hasn't gelled. It hasn't been galvanized by a tough season that they went through. There's been too much change. There's been too many, they played well in the transfer portal. They have this amazing recruiting class come in. But you think that when you bring in a recruiting class this good, automatically it means you're going to be a national title contender. It doesn't. I've never seen that happen. I don't know if you have a memory of a team that brings in a number one recruiting class and the freshmen play a huge role. Like, you might have 1 or 2 freshmen contribute, but I've never seen a team where you rely on like 5 or 6 freshmen win a national title. Sophomore's a different story. I think this, and again, I fully believe if they can figure out the quarterback position this year, this is highly possible the number 1 team in the country next year. But number 5 is a little bit high for me. I'm going to say 9-3.
Yeah, I mean, the cool thing is, usually you see some of these freshmen and sophomores maybe hitting a wall late in the season, but down the stretch, they got Florida at home, at Auburn, home versus UMass, and then home versus LSU. The only real hurdle after that Alabama game is Ole Miss on October 29th. So it's really, can you get the guys to play at a higher level early on and then sort of work your way through pickups down the stretch? But that's also where if they fade and they get tired, they might lose one of those games late. It might actually be the potentially best coaching job Jimbo's ever done, because he's going to have to keep this team ready. He's going to keep his team organized and sharp to even compete right off the bat with a lot of young talent that last year wasn't really there. Not many receivers are coming back. I think all freshman receivers might even be starting by week 2, because they're just going to need to get as many athletes out there on the field as possible and try to be explosive. It's going to be interesting to see what Jimbo does and how he gets his team ready to play, because words are words, and talking season, as they say, is about to hit the crescendo at SEC Media Days in about a month from now, and then after that, it's put the foot to leather and let's get going.
All right, Fresh. Our number 4 team in the entire country is the Notre Dame Fighting Irish out of South Bend, Indiana. Notre Dame finishing last year at 11-2, going to the Fiesta Bowl and losing to Oklahoma State, the Cowboys. Brian Kelly says, "Deuces, I'm out." And for about 24 hours, maybe 48 hours, there was some question on who was going to be the Notre Dame coach. We all thought that it was a slam dunk hire. Notre Dame do the right thing, hire Marcus Freeman. Marcus Freeman is now the head coach over there, going from the defense coordinator position. Notre Dame, a lot of talent on this roster as well too, but they lose their top quarterback, they lose their leading rusher from last year, and they lose their best defensive player. They bring back some people that we really like. They have a really good linebacking core. Michael Mayer might be arguably the best tight end in the country. Him and Brock Bowers out of Georgia, that's 1 and 2, and it's kind of over who you have preference for. So talk to me a little bit, Fresh. Notre Dame, what are we to expect out of Marcus Freeman in year one?
Well, first off, Coach, don't poke the bear. And don't poke your alma mater either by talking about academics and all that stuff, because that's the last thing you want when you walk into the horseshoe against a team that is already very hungry for a title. So moving on from that, I think this defense is going to be elite, probably even better than last year, because you figure last year was Marcus Freeman's first year at the DC, so guys are even still trying to figure out how he's going to call a game, and he's also trying to figure out what guys he wants on the field at what time. The defense for Notre Dame got better as the year went on, but I think this year they're going to be better. Kyle Williams, obviously, he was hurt, so he didn't play the last couple of games of the season, so they had to start running guys in the rotation like Bertrand and others through the secondary. But I think Notre Dame, of all the transfers that happened, all the transfer market, I think Notre Dame got the biggest transfer of all, and that is going out and getting Brandon Joseph from Northwestern. So 2020 All-American at safety at Northwestern comes in now to be in that secondary, basically replaces Hamilton. Going to be a big, big player back there with Bertrand. And you get two safeties back there. You got a solid secondary. All those guys return. Notre Dame's always going to have defensive linemen and linebackers, athletes on the field, coaching to his philosophy. I think Freeman is going to have a real good job of getting the defense to be very cohesive and aggressive and be big-time difference makers. Expect to see them top 5 defensively for the entire season in points allowed, turnovers, and yards. I think this is going to be the real focal point for keeping them in football games. The offense, though, anything, you're going to need a quarterback. Last year, we saw Drew Pine play. He played in 2 games, really only the Cincinnati game, did not really shine that much at all. Tyler Butcher, number 2 leading rusher on the team, was also got some playing time at quarterback behind Jack Cohn. But Jack Cohn ended up playing the Fiesta Bowl. We could have thought, hey, you know what, Fiesta Bowl, how about you run with the young quarterbacks out there and let Cohn just chill? They went for the win. We're going to have to figure out which one of those guys is going to be your man. Kyron Williams is gone. I think Logan Diggs, Chris Tyree are going to be a little mix and mash there. Thunder and lightning aspect from the Notre Dame game offensively and running the football. Notre Dame is who they are. They're not going to be a 4 receiver spread offense chucking it around all the time. Like, that's not – they know they have to be to get that offense going. That's not traditionally who they are. They're going to be 2 tight ends. They are a tight end factory. They're an offensive line factory. They're going to run the football, play action, and play as a team. Use the offense to help set up the defense and vice versa. Don't try to score too fast and then have your defense get back on the field and become exhausted. Play with that team philosophy, and I think that's what they're going to keep doing. Run the football, use tight ends, use your elite offense. You recruit year in and year in and year in and develop and go from there. This team, everyone's seen the video. Once Freeman was announced as the head coach, the entire team erupted in the locker room. You don't see that if a new guy's hired. Like, the entire team wanted Freeman as the coach. So now you guys have to do the favor for him and actually play for him. You can have who you want as coach, but now you got to play for him and show up on game day. Interesting to see, though, who receivers will step up and make plays for this quarterback, whoever it's going to be. Will be Avery Davis. He's going to take the next level. Brandon Lindsey. Is he going to take the next level? I think this Notre Dame football team has a lot of talent cohesively and together. Which one of these guys is going to be that big playmaker that they can rely on in a late 4th quarter to get that big-time clutch catch? Who is going to show up in the game? Like, go back to the Cincinnati game last year. Who's going to be that one defender when Hamilton's not playing that's going to step up and make a huge stop in a game-changing play to reverse the course, to reverse the stem of the tide? And then offensively, who's going to take over and put some points on the board when it needs to happen? Who's going to make that clutch 3rd down catch? There's tons of talent on the team, but who's going to rise above and be that leader offensively or defensively to make those impact plays? I think that's the one thing we're really looking for, is who's going to be that impact player. You do return 10 of your top 12 tacklers, so you're going to have a lot of experience coming back. 5 return from that secondary, and then you bring in Joseph, obviously. So you're going to very solid depth at that secondary position, which you're going to need right off the bat versus Ohio State, but you're going to need throughout the season, especially when they end it at USC. Recruiting, always going to bring in great players. I think they're going to they're more of a developed guys. You're not going to see many freshmen get on the field immediately, but under Freeman, you never know what his philosophy is going to be. Like we mentioned earlier, they open at Ohio State, you bookend it with that, closing at USC. Your two biggest games of the season. It's a 5-game season of reality. Ohio State, North Carolina, BYU, Clemson, and USC. I think when the dust settles, they go 10-2, and their only losses are Ohio State and USC.
This is an interesting team here, Fresh. I really am really intrigued with what they're going to do on offense here. Any college coach would be excited to return all 5 of your offensive linemen. They're returning all 5 starters on the offense line. They may be the best unit in the country. They may be. I don't know if I haven't like looked up enough on their statistics. I saw their center Patterson on a couple of All-American watches. Looks like he might be a preseason All-American, but there's some serious talent on this offensive line, and that's going to make whoever's job at quarterback very easy. It's going to make Tyree's job at running back real easy as well. Like you said, you're going up against Ohio State. That's talent versus talent. They have the talent they can match up with you. You know, we're both pretty high on BYU this year. I think that's going to be a better game than people think, and I think Notre Dame is going to wipe the absolute floor with Clemson. The real interesting one is going to be that showdown in Los Angeles against USC. Is this defense going to be fully prepared for what could possibly be an amazing offensive attack? So it's like that unstoppable force versus the immovable object. Like, which one is going to be the one that gives on this one? For our buddy Lance, just because he always gave me a hard time about this, I still really like J.D. Bertram a lot. As he always said, yeah, he's a really nice player, but we never talked enough about Kyle Hamilton. But I still think Bertram's a great player. He was your leading tackler, 101 tackles. Coming back again, he looks like he's going to kind of be leading that defense. And there's talent there. And you already talked about the transfer Brandon Joseph there. I'm excited to see what Mayer does. I really am, because, you know, last year he had 840 yards receiving on 7 touchdowns there. If I recall, and again, Fresh, correct me if I'm wrong because I don't have it right in front of me, didn't he get hurt in a game or two? Didn't he battle some injuries where he like maybe missed the second half?
Mayer, he's dinged up here and there. I know it was one game versus Cincinnati. He got beat up. He got dinged up pretty good. Had to come out for a couple plays and come back. Being the only option, he still toughed it out and made some plays, big catches.
Yeah, and that's really the exciting thing when you have a guy like that who is just such a matchup problem. For you can't he's too fast for a linebacker and he's too big for a corner. What do you do? Like, how do you defend against a guy like that? I'm excited to see what he does there. It's interesting to see this Notre Dame team because you're right. I'm going 2 losses. I'm going 11-2 for this team. They're going to make another New Year's Day 6 game. I think though the most fascinating game, because again, obviously, folks, we know Ohio State, Notre Dame, interesting game. USC, Notre Dame, interesting game. That October 8th matchup versus BYU, that October 8th matchup, that's a fun one, man. That's one that I'm going to get the popcorn ready for that one. If they can keep that defense near that 15th in the nation ranking, Notre Dame's going to make some noise. I don't necessarily know if I can say that they're going to be a national title contender. I think this is going to be a very, very good team, but I think they're just going to be just on the slight outside looking in on the college football playoff.
I think one of the best things that happened to this football team, it's going to sound weird, but they had a huge lead versus Oklahoma State, and they were absolutely wiping the floor with them. Blowing that lead and losing gives Freeman a whole host of coaching points and bulletin board material for the entire offseason of, hey, you guys let us down in the second half. You guys didn't finish the football game. This and this and this, and keep repeating it in the weight room. Keep repeating it during the drill. Keep building their mind. Like, you had the football game blocked and you guys couldn't finish. And keep repeating that and building out that for motivation for the season, I think actually will do them more good than harm. If they won the game going away, whatever, it's a great, you win a bowl game, but Now having the entire summer and all spring and all fall camp, hearing that you had a huge chance to win and you still couldn't win a bowl game, how are you going to change that narrative? I think that's going to be helpful build recruiting and build into a new mindset for this football team under Coach Freeman.
Our number 3 team in the country, your defending national champions, the Georgia Bulldogs, 14-1, winning everything last year, ending the 42-year curse of a title drought. They come back. It's fascinating because Stetson Bennett is in a doctoral program over there at Georgia right now. I think this is his 7th year of college football. It's the 6th year of NCAA eligibility, but if I read that right, he's been playing college football for 7 years now. They got a lot to replace. And I don't know how you take possibly one of the best defenses we've seen, at least in the last decade. Maybe maybe I want to almost go as far as calling it a generational defense, but I'll easily say that's the best defense we've seen probably in a decade. You only have 3 returning starters on that team. Nolan Smith, though, is back. That's huge for Georgia. Stetson Bennett, there's leadership there. And for the thing is, Georgia does one thing well. They produce running backs. McIntosh, he's back this year. They also have, oh gosh, I'm going to miss this, Milton coming back as well. But the kid that I'm excited for, the 17-year-old kid who enrolled in spring and his arms look like they're the size of a tree trunk, Branson Robinson. This guy is a monster. Remember this name because if that dude gets on the field, watch out. Number 3 in the country. I think the only reason why we're not having them at 1 and 2 is because you're going to have to replace 8 starters on that defense. So why don't you give me your take on your Georgia Bulldogs?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's great to be celebrating national championship. But you're right. When you have 15 players get drafted and you set a record, and most players drafted on defense by a single team in the first round, and sort of just going through all those accolades, that's a whole heck of a lot of players to really replicate on the field at the same time and get other young guys up to speed to play at that same level. You're going to have the Nolan Smiths who came back. Keely Ringo is coming in another year. I think he can actually get better. He had moments last year where he was not the perfect corner and had some chances, really some growing pains. Made the interception to steal the game, but still, I think Georgia fans can all agree, and I'm sure he even agrees, he can improve and get even better, become more of a lockdown corner himself. Jalen Carter, there's scouts and coaches who said he was even better than Wyatt and Davis at defensive line. So Carter now, how will he do it by himself? The other 2 tree trunks around him and the 3 guys in the middle of the field. Can he actually perform on his own? I think he can. And then you look at Chris Smith at safety, who returned the pick versus Clemson for a touchdown. No, he is another returner. And then from there, you look at the young guys who really haven't got on the field yet, or have been sparingly here and there or in blowouts. But where are they now? These high recruits, where are they going to actually show up? How are you going to get the McKeel Shermans, the Traceman Marshalls, Rain Davises, the Small Mondins, the Xavier Sories, David Daniels, Nealon Greens, Kamari Lassiter, Malachi Starks? The whole list goes on and on of all these 4- and 5-star highly recruited players who now on campus. Now they're sophomores, they may be juniors or even freshmen walking in. Now you've got to live up to that standard, and you've got to be able to take it to the next level and play at a higher level. I got a feeling you will not see that generational defense this season. There will be growing pains. There will be times where they might give up 20, 25 points a game. The offense, though, is where the talent is returning. Stetson Bennett come back. Technically, it's his 3rd year as a starting quarterback now. I should say 2.5. He had the half year in 2020, learned a lot there. Obviously, last year still had a lot of doubters. I was one of them for a while. Went in and got the job done, and now he's coming back again. You got Arian Smith, McConkey, Mitchell, Jackson, Rosemary Jack Saint, and then you have Dominic Blaylock, who's been injured for a couple of years, coming back. Receiver depth, you go 6, 7, 8 deep, and you have probably the deepest tight end room in the country with Eric Gilbert as the number 3, Bowers, Washington, and you bring Delp in as a recruited freshman. So you're going to have 4 guys there, and you mentioned the running backs already. So the talent and offense is there, offensive line is there. They're going to have to score points, though. When your offensive coordinator gets paid $2 million and he's getting job offers and interest from other schools and and in the NFL and decides to stay, the pressure's on the offense now to score consistently. Not score in the fourth quarter when the defense has, sort of worn them down, but put up points early to help support that defense. Might be in a lot more shootouts where you're going to have to be able to step up. The talent's there on this team, the experience. I think even the pressure of trying to win a national championship is now been lifted off the shoulders. You could see for many years, there's probably situations where teams you haven't won in a while where you guys just sort of you get tense because you haven't won it. The pressure from the fans, the pressure from the coaches, everything about winning national championship. Now that's gone, but then you have the pressure of repeating and defending your title. So it's going to kind of like a trade there. I think going into this season, they should be 7-0 going into the cocktail party. The one game that I will say beware of South Carolina on September 17th. It's going to be a noon kickoff. Columbia, South Carolina is going to be hotter than hell. Probably going to be 110 on the field. Make sure you start hydrating now. Be ready. It's going to be hot. It's going to be humid. And that game, you might get a lot of guys cramped. So you're going to be ready to play if you're on that team on that travel roster because if you're there, you're going to expect to get some reps. From there, the season is going to be, can you take care of Florida? It's still the cocktail party. Anything can happen in Jacksonville. You got the Vols. Now, anyone knows about Tennessee, Georgia history, lately especially, when Georgia goes to Knoxville, they usually take care of business in pretty impressive fashion. All the crazy nonsense, the upsets happen when the Vols come to Athens. Whether it's 2004 when they came down there and beat them, 2007 they beat them, 2005 they beat them, and then we all know the Hail Mary in 2015, 2016. It's the weird stuff that happens when they come on the road. So be prepared for the Vols. They're going to be fired up. They won't have the crowd, but they actually might be more lethal because they don't have those distractions of the fans. It's just them on the road by themselves. So the fan base is going to show up in Sanford and be ready, but Dogs are going to be ready to go the week after Florida to take on the Vols. Mississippi State kind of in there a little bit, and then Kentucky. It's the back end of the schedule for Georgia that's going to be sure they are focused on and healthy enough to make it through. I think this team does get to Atlanta. They win the SC East. Tennessee does give them a push, but I think Tennessee's schedule is a little more difficult, and they might have a couple slip-ups there that could cause them to not surpass the Dogs. And then you're going to get your Georgia-Alabama SEC, championship game, rematch number 12, I think, about that point. And both teams will probably make the playoff and go from there.
Almost can feel like I'm going to parrot on everything that you said there. My question is more about the defense this year, where last year I felt like we knew the known quantity was how good the Georgia defense would be. Our questions were all on the offense. I actually think this offense is going to put up some points. I think that you're going to see a very traditional Georgia attack. They're going to run the football. They're going to use play action. They're going to hit the tight end, and they're going to take a couple of big plays downfield. I really think that they're going to be a more efficient offense. They might not be a 35, 42 points a game offense, but this is going to be we're going to probably put up 27, 28 points, and it's going to be enough for us to win almost every game getting off the bus. You look at the schedule, and I'm with you, Fresh. I'm looking at you're 7-0 going into the cocktail party. And if you're not, then something bad's happened along the way. Florida, you've owned that, and Smart's really taken that much more seriously these days. I don't think that they're underprepared for that. I would love to see what Napier brings into that rivalry right there. But realistically, I'm looking at the cocktail party against Florida and saying Georgia should be at least 17-point favorites in that game. These should be double-digit favorites. It's the same thing with week 1, September 3rd with Oregon. I had a buddy and friend of our show, Adam, text me about how everyone's excited for that Oregon game and it's the marquee game of the first weekend. I said, how can it be the marquee game of the first weekend when Georgia opens up as an 18.5-point favorite over another top 25 team? That's not a marquee game. And when you're 25.5 point or 18.5 point favorite there,
Ohio State knows marquee game.
Yeah, I know that, but that's just us talking here. This is a very, very good team. You're right. That 3-game stretch there, Tennessee is going to be a really hyped game because we both think that offense, if Tennessee is healthy going into Athens, that's going to be a fun one. At Mississippi State could be a letdown game. You have two really emotionally high games. Sooner or later, you're going to have to let yourself breathe a little bit. Usually Georgia at the back end of their schedule, and if I'm going back here, last year you had Charleston Southern the week before he played Georgia Tech. You don't have that FCS team at the end of the season this year. I mean, I guess you could call Georgia Tech an FCS team, but that's that. That Kentucky game is interesting too. Kentucky returns a lot of talent on that team, and the game is in Lexington. I don't necessarily think you're going to lose that game. I'm looking at their results from last year. The closest game Georgia had in the second half, outside of the 10-3 win versus Clemson, there's 27 points there. There's 24, 17. So they had a 17-point win over Kentucky at home. That was the closest. I think you're going to see a lot more games of them. And I agree with you. I think they're going to Atlanta. They're going to be representing the East in the SEC. I think we're going to get a great showdown with Alabama again. But expect this go around to see a lot of wins right around that 7-10 range, not the 17-24 range as well there. I still really like Georgia. There's a lot of talent. The Bulldogs fans have to be excited because now you can puff your chest out. You are one of the elite teams in the country. You are in the conversations with Clemson, and Clemson took a pretty big step back, but in the conversation with Alabama, with LSU, with Ohio State, with all the teams that have won the national title through the college football playoff, and say, we now have our seat at the table. It's a feel-good story. America really liked it because it had been so long for Georgia to win a title. It's that goodwill will last for a year or two, and then the fun stuff begins. The fun stuff begins when people start hating on you, because people don't hate on you if you're bad. Like, if you suck, you suck. And no one's going to be like, no one walks around unless you're a rival of, let's say, like James Madison. No one walks around being like, man, I hope James Madison loses this week. No one cares. No one says that.
No one hates Vanderbilt.
No one hates Vanderbilt. Yeah, exactly. That's the fun part. When people start telling you how much you suck, or that your team's not good, or you're, overrated, or blah, 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 it's because you are good. It's because there's a respect on the sports thing. That's still a year away for Georgia, especially if Georgia gets to the SEC title game this year. That'll be a fun one, but you still got Alabama in your conference. That's going to be a little bit tricky to deal with. Georgia's still a national title contender, even with all of the losses on the defense. There's only been a handful of times, and I had to look it up here fresh. It's extremely difficult to repeat as national champions. Only teams that have done it in the last couple of years, and if you look at the 2011 and the 2012, Crimson Tide did it. Even you go back before that, you take a look at USC technically did it in 03-04, although that 03 title is split with LSU. And then even further back, you have to go back to 94-95 Nebraska, the last times you can kind of see teams winning back-to-back national titles. Not saying it's impossible, but it's going to be a very, very difficult task for the Bulldogs. I'm going to say 11-1. I'm saying that one, I'll say this. They're going to go 12-0 in the regular season. First loss is going to be in the SEC title game, though.
Yeah, I think this team you're going to see a lot of names. If you're not too familiar with the program, you're going to see a lot of names you've never heard before on defense, and we're rotating a lot of guys in. If you want to know who they are, take a look at the recruiting classes right now from the past few years. That depth is there. Those guys will be getting a lot of playing time early and often.
All right, Fresh. Our number 2 team in the country, the Ohio State Buckeyes. 11-2 last year. Ryan Day taking over for Urban Meyer. Ryan Day's been there for 3 years now. It's kind of weird to think about that. This team is now 3 years removed from Urban. Returns maybe the most. I don't know if you have a better 3-headed monster in the country between C.J. Stroud, Travion Henderson, and Jackson Smith-Njigba. All of us saw Njigba's Rose Bowl games, 350 yards, multiple touchdowns, just insanity. C.J. Stroud, there's a lot of questions on him going into the season. 44 touchdown passes. They do lose Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, both to the first round of the NFL draft. But you have some guys coming in. They've recruited very, very well at the wide receiver position. The biggest question to me is, can Jim Knowles from Oklahoma State fix this Ohio State defense? And we go back to that week 2 loss versus Oregon. On paper, it's a 7-point loss. But if we go back and listen to the tape, that defense was awful. That defense was absolutely terrible. And then you go Flash forward to the Michigan game. Michigan beats Ohio State 42-27. That's not supposed to happen. The defense is there. Ohio State's got a tough schedule this year, and they got to be better. They were 97th against the pass last year. What about you, Fresh? How do you see this year for the Buckeyes?
Well, I figure from the skill position, this offense is on a mission. They're ready to light up the scoreboard. I think they're angry. They know they didn't show up fully versus Oregon, and then they sort of hung that on. But then there's games where, look at that Michigan State game last year. That game was over in the third possession. It was 21-0 in 3 minutes in the ball game. We thought it was going to be a big game. And this offense is going to score with anybody. If you watch the Rose Bowl, you know they're going to score with anybody. The Michigan game, I think, is the biggest fuel of the entire thing, though. We've heard it. They've been talking smack. They have the little, they put stuff on their. They put a little lapel on their rings about how they beat Ohio State. It was a big deal. One out of the past 12 years or 10 years or whatever it is. They released their demons, but I think Ohio State's now about to get revenge and start a new series of wins. In that game, you mentioned the defense and how they let Corum and Haskins run all over them, but the defense wasn't the only problem. The offensive line was getting collapsed at times, and Stroud had tough time to sit back and throw. And that's kind of set up short fields and short possessions and allowed Michigan to take control. If that offensive line can get a little bit better, give them a little more time, and that defense can improve just a little bit, that offense is going to score 40 points a game. And if you can just give up 30, you win every football game 40-30, you'll be fine. Marvin Harrison II, that number 2 receiver, I think is interesting to watch among the other recruits, but they're going to be ready to light up and make it happen right off the bat. The season, they open up with the Irish at home, but the season's really a 5-game stretch, starting with Wisconsin on September 24th, then Rutgers at Sparty, bye week, host Iowa, and then Penn State on basically the Halloween weekend, 10/29. That's going to be the stretch that really defines this football team. Watch out for Rutgers, because that's the one game in between Wisconsin and Sparty, and then you have the Iowa Penn State. Like that game, Greg Schiano can coach some defense, and he's done some decent recruiting to help build that program back up. So watch that. That's going to be the one game that's going to sneak in there and catch them if they're young. I think they're going to be perfect through that, though. I don't see them having issues with Northwestern or Indiana or Maryland, and they're going to get the game at home in the horseshoe. They just need to do what they need to do, focus. I think they are better on paper than Penn State. They have a better offense than Penn State. I don't think Penn State's defense on paper right now, on the middle, late June, is going to be able to hold them. They might be improving as the season goes on, but I think this year, Ohio State needs to know they can't give Michigan any light. Michigan had a lot of players leave. They cannot let them get back and take over and dominate. They can't let Michigan State get a hold because they're starting to build a recruiting base there. They can't let Penn State recover. They've got to be able to shut it down. Last year was their 1 year. Everyone had their chance, if you will, and they've got to be able to, all right, we're done. We're back in control. This is us. We are not just the Big Ten East rulers. We are the Big Ten rulers. I don't see anyone in the West truly giving them any fits. I don't see Iowa giving a problem in the Big Ten, championship game. Minnesota, Wisconsin, Nebraska. I don't see any of them truly manning up and giving them a brawl. If they can make it to Indianapolis, take care of that business, they're in the playoff. And this team is going to be 12-0, going to Indianapolis. It's college football playoff or bust for them, and then let the chips fall where they may from there. I think this team is a very, very good football team. As much as I have expectations, I'm just going to say it right now. If Ryan Day does not win the Big Ten this year and does not get his team back in the playoff, for what he's getting paid, big as a thing in Ohio and big a thing in the country is Ohio State football, his job might be on the line. And rumors might start popping up, and he'll have to start dealing with that because it is ripe for the taking, and you have the talent. We know C.J. Stroud's going to the pros after this season, and Jigba's going to the pros after this season. Henderson's going after a year after that. So your window, you're going to keep recruiting at a high level, but you've got to get it done now. You can't let anyone else get a leg up on you or continue to rise. You've got to squash it and take advantage of the situation now. This team will be in the playoffs undefeated, and if they aren't, Ryan Day is going to have to do some serious answering of some questions.
I'm going to say that they got one loss in there. I'm going to say that they go 11-1 the regular season. They're still going to wind up in Indianapolis playing for the Big Ten title game. To me, this schedule's a gauntlet, though, to me. And I'm looking at going, you start the game off, you get Notre Dame at home, you get Wisconsin at home, you get Iowa at home, and you get Michigan at home. Traveling up to East Lansing is not easy, and I'm always terrified going to Happy Valley at night. That's going to be a night game. It's going to be a whiteout. I don't like those games. I really don't. They make me nervous, and that's going to be a very, very tough game, especially for what we think is going to be a very much improved Penn State team. I think it comes down to the defense. I really do. Because, like you said, Fresh, this is going to be one of the best offenses in the country, no matter what. They're going to put up some points. They're going to be really, really good. And maybe this isn't a bad thing. They're realistically only bringing back 4 or 5 starters on the defensive end. Their defense wasn't that great. And when you could talk about whether it was a scheme issue with Kerry Combs, you could talk about whether it was a talent issue, whatever it was. And former Buckeye Dustin Fox used to say this all the time, says the Ohio State needs to bring back what was always known as the Silver Bullets defense. That's what they have to return to. They have to return to the Silver Bullets. They have to have that speed, and they are recruiting those people. This could be an interesting year for the Buckeyes. I'm almost going to say it with you there, playoffs or bust. You better be in that conversation. You better be in that conversation, or I don't think Ryan Days would lose his job going into next year. I think that there would be a little more chatter than what anyone would really like. But Fresh, I was catching this before we go on to our number one team. I was looking at this that week. You brought it up already. The weekend of October 29th. Have you seen the slate yet for the October 29th?
I just know there's only one game on my radar, and that's the cocktail party. But I got a feeling it's always packed with a lot of.
That might be maybe prior to rivalry week, which we know is going to be huge. That might be the best college football weekend going into it. Just real quick before we release our number one team. Thursday night, Oklahoma State or Oklahoma, Iowa State. Okay, Iowa State might take a little bit thing, go down. Virginia Tech at NC State. That's an interesting. I would be very, very interested in that. Miami, Florida versus Virginia. That's going to be a lot of points right there.
Yep.
Kentucky versus Tennessee. Cincinnati versus UCF. Interesting, real interesting game there. You look to go a little bit further down. Underrated game of that weekend. Underrated game. San Diego State, Fresno State.
Okay.
Underrated game that weekend. You got big brother, little brother, Michigan State and Michigan. You got Ole Miss versus A&M that weekend. You got Notre Dame traveling to the Carrier Dome and Syracuse. Not an easy place to play there. You have Ohio State, Penn State. You have the cocktail party of Georgia, Florida. Also, and there's one more that was interesting is, and again, just an intriguing game on my end that I'm always interested in is Nevada versus San Jose State. That could be interesting as well because both of those teams look like they might be something out west there. That weekend is a loaded weekend. I know that you're probably going to be a lot more celebratory over there at the field here in Jacksonville, but it's going to be a fun one.
That's the thing. That's the excitement now. Looking at the schedules, look at how I'm going to schedule my Saturday afternoon. Do I actually want to go to the game, or do I want to sit on my couch and have all the games lined up for me? And it's yeah, it's a great thing to talk about, especially when it's mid-June and there's baseball and hockey, but football is still.
I still think we should record from the tailgate and not go like we just record from the tailgate. That would be fun. All right, Fresh. Our number one team in the country, the one team we have not talked about, your runner-up from the national championship game, the Alabama Crimson Tide. Coming off 13-2 year last year, only team to beat Georgia. But this wasn't a typical Alabama team. They struggled versus A&M. We saw that. And there's a lot of games that they didn't really put people away until the very, very end. You look at that LSU game, that was at home in Tuscaloosa, and you only won by 6. Arkansas, again, in Tuscaloosa, they only won that game by 7. Auburn, it took 4 overtimes to beat Auburn. But then on top of that, you're the one team that's put up 41 points on a once-in-a-decade, once-in-a-generational defense there. They got the Heisman Trophy winner coming back, Bryce Young. They lose their top running back. They lose 2 really, really good receivers. Now, they got some talent in the pipeline coming up. Oh, yeah, they also have this guy by the name of Will Anderson, who may be one of the top defenders in the entire country, if not the best defender in the entire country. The Crimson Tide are loaded. They really, really are. But the schedule's a little interesting, too. At Texas, week 2. At Arkansas, October 1st. Texas A&M in Tuscaloosa, October 8th. Then got at Tennessee. You got to travel to Knoxville that next weekend. At LSU, at Ole Miss. And then the Iron Bowl is in Tuscaloosa versus Auburn. Tricky schedule, but a lot of talent on this Crimson Tide team. Fresh, how do you see it?
Well, I think the reason people ask, hey, you're a Georgia fan. Why do you have Alabama number one preseason? Why do you have Ohio State number two? Why is Georgia at three? Look, Stetson Bennett is has done a great job at quarterback, but he's not Bryce Young. And Bryce Young, even when Jarvis Williams, was knocked out, or Weddle was taken out, he was still able to move the football and put up some yards and be dangerous. And there was still fear that, hey, I don't care if they're wearing a crimson helmet, they're still going to find a way to catch the football. Him and Will Anderson are the reason why they are the number one team. There's not much of a difference between, in my opinion, truly, Alabama, Georgia, and Ohio State are, if you want to give me like a 93 to 94 score, they'd all be in that 93 point something in the 94. They're all very, very similar. They all have something they could really get better at, but they're all very elite. But Bryce Young and Will Anderson pushed them over. They also have Jordan Battle and Drew Turner, two other elite defenders coming back. One thing about Alabama, that defense early on, it struggled a lot. And it got better as the season went on. And they got better down the stretch. They had a lot of young guys having to play because the year before they had a ton of players drafted. So they sort of got guys on the field, got guys in the rotation, figured out their supposed to do. But now, you came out, I think they played with more passion in the SEC championship game. They took care of business, got themselves in the playoff. And that defense versus Georgia in the championship game, national championship game, wore down in the second half. You could definitely tell the running game and the passing attack, they were out of space. They could not play at the high level. That experience, though, I think will help them because their offense did not finish the job when they actually could have put some touchdowns up early. You look at who they bring in now. They got a five-star receiver, Shaz Preston, coming in. I got a feeling he's playing from day one. He's going to be an elite down the field deep threat for Bryce Young to keep that offense moving. But then they went out and they only got three real transfers, but the three transfers were probably three of the top 8 players you can get the transfer portal. Eli Ricks at corner from LSU, wide receiver Jermaine Burton from Georgia, and then running back Jahmyr Gibbs from Georgia Tech, who's going to be the number one starter. All three of those guys are starting day one. And Burton was a stud and a big-time player for the Dogs. Ricks is a shutdown corner for LSU. So both of them coming to Alabama from interconference rivals is huge for Nick Saban to go out and grab and bring players in and have them contribute. You already mentioned the schedule. I do think this team's going to be angry. I think they have something to prove because we've heard it since January 11th. The reason why Alabama lost is because their two receivers got hurt and they couldn't play. Everybody has injuries. You've got to still show up and play football. And if you're Alabama, you shouldn't be complaining about injuries because your team should be elite anyway. That's what we keep hearing, you're elite. Two players not in the field shouldn't mean you guys are no longer competitive. Your team is good. You have depth. It might be one of the hardest schedules they've had in recent memory. I think with Arkansas getting a little bit of more depth, the A&M game, just a heightened sense of intrigue now after the comments. And then Tennessee improving, which for a while now, that Tennessee-Alabama game has not really been a game. It's just been on the schedule. Historically, in the 70s, 80s, and 90s was something, but since Saban's taken over, it has not been a football game. Mississippi State is that trap game, though, in between the Tennessee and the LSU matchup. LSU, Bama in Death Valley. We're going to do a podcast about most underrated home environments. Death Valley is not underrated. It is very intimidating, and it has a major impact on the football game. A mediocre LSU team playing at home at night becomes a very, very good football team just because that crowd is buying in and brings the atmosphere to it. That game was going to be even elevated a little higher, and it's going to make Bryce Young have to play at a different level, make those players make their reads quicker. It's not like you're playing in Tuscaloosa at home. You're on the road in a hostile environment. That has a huge impact on the football game. And Ole Miss, Lane Kiffin is kind of laying the weeds there. Yeah, Matt Corral's gone, but he's sort of sitting back laughing, looking at Saban, and he knows, hey, I coach for Saban. Jimbo, you coach for Saban. You don't run your mouth against the king. Now, what Nick does, we all know Nick's done some stuff, some shady stuff at Alabama. They bring players in. Everybody's done it. It's going to be, I think he's sitting back, letting everyone take care of their own business. He's going to try to manage himself in the weeds and try to get the upset. If Nick Saban and his coaching staff can keep their minds of the team focused and keep themselves driving 1 week at a time, keep that same Alabama mindset, I think they will be in a good position. Could this team go undefeated? Yes. I think this team goes 11-1 and still goes to Atlanta. I think just the schedule is going to be a little more daunting than what Georgia has to deal with. And somebody around the way is It might get them, but I think they still end up both meeting in Atlanta for the SC title.
Don't sleep on that Utah State game to open the season. Utah State placed Connecticut the week before as a warm-up game in that week 0. Utah State was 11-3 last year. I'm not saying that Utah State's going to go into Tuscaloosa and beat them or anything like that, but don't be shocked if Utah State is kind of hanging around that first, second quarter type of thing, and Alabama doesn't put them away till like the third. People will talk about that. Like if Alabama doesn't put away a team like Utah State in the first quarter, people are going to have a conversation about, is this Crimson Tide team overrated? I don't think so. I think you made a great point there, Fresh, with Alabama, Ohio State, and Georgia being 1, 2, 3. If we flip the order, if we went, just go by the order of the finish last year, Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, you're not going to get an argument on most people. You're not going to get an argument. These three teams are separated by a razor-thin margin, and I think each one of them has a little bit of a question. Ohio State's coming in. Can they get better on defense? Georgia coming in. Can they replace all those starters that they lost on their defense? Alabama coming in this year. Can they replace their offensive weapons? And I think Alabama has another question, and you didn't mention this one. That Alabama offensive line really struggled last year. I don't want to make it sound like they struggled like a team like Northern Illinois playing Notre Dame struggled. We're talking like they struggled to Alabama standards. Alabama produced, and that's with probably one of the best offensive tackle prospects in Evan Neal on that line. They have to be better in the trenches. They really, really do. Too many times what do we see? We saw Robinson Jr. last year, 2 yards, 3 yards, and didn't really break those huge runs. Bryce Young threw the ball very, very well. 47 touchdown passes. But Alabama, while, Robinson had 1,300 yards and 14 touchdowns, it never felt like an Alabama running game of years past. It's not Derrick Henry. It's not even Melvin Ingram or Mark Ingram. It's not even Trent Richardson here. I need to see something better out of the Alabama rushing attack. I need to see something better out of their offensive line. I think they're going to be good defensively, though.
If you watched last year, I think there's questions about Alabama's full offense. Bryce Young was just chucking all over the place, and he was just a phenomenal quarterback. But the offensive line still was giving him trouble. He was running for his life. The LSU game, they were bringing pressure, and that's the reason why it was a football game, because that defense was getting after him. The offense for LSU couldn't score, but the defense was getting after him. The offensive line couldn't block anyone running or pass protection. But then you look at the Auburn game, the reason why another reason it was so close is that Auburn's defense was getting after Bryce Young and shutting that passing game down and taking the running game away. Then they shifted around the offensive line about halftime, and that's when Bryce Young started getting a little more time. The running game started coming together, and they're able to get that comeback and get the win in overtime. And that shifting around, they played well in the conference championship game, and then they were efficient versus Cincinnati. I think they did what they had to do, but then Georgia made adjustments on those changes in the championship game, and you saw as the football game won that Georgia defense overwhelmed that Alabama offense, especially in the red zone early in the first half when normally Alabama teams, they would have run the ball, boom, 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 touchdown. But they were getting shut down. There was a lot of confusion at line of scrimmage, and they were forcing field goal attempts, and that's what kept the game going, took down the environment, and then Georgia's offense took over in the second half. And that offensive line they're recruiting 5-stars everywhere. You look at the depth chart, there's 5-star recruits and high 4-stars. They've got to get the 5 guys there. It's interesting, though. You look at the former Jaguar head coach has been the offensive line coach there this is going to his second season. Is he going to be able to get to those guys and get them to understand the concepts to block and to protect the quarterback? Because if they're not listening to what he's saying and they're just trying to do it off of natural ability and they're not communicating with the quarterback or communicating to each other, because offensive line, especially on the road, you've got to use hand signals. You got to communicate to each other. All right, are we shifting inside? How are we going to cover our blocks? When you have audible being called out by the quarterback, am I actually hearing what the coverage change is going to be? And then be able to adjust and function off of that. Offensive linemen actually have to be the smartest guys on the field because they have to read the defense, read leverage, and then understand coverages and understand the audibles and be able to work as one unit, not 5 individual guys. And if they're passing somebody off in protection, they've got to know that guy to their left or their right is taking on that responsibility and being there to cover them. Building that unit up, getting 5 guys, and you're really going to need at least 7 total. You need 3 guys, 2 or 3 swing linemen to come in there every once in a while and help spend spare time with injuries, but you got to find a cohesive unit that takes over because Alabama. The reason why their running backs have been so successful and some of their less than athletic quarterbacks like Greg McElroy or Mac Jones have been so successful because run the football successfully. You don't get your jersey dirty. Play action and receivers are wide open in the secondary. That's how they built the Alabama brand: is discipline, protect the quarterback, run the football, dominate the offensive line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. We didn't really see that last year, and I think that's the one thing. Can Nick Saban get that dominance of the line of scrimmage back on offense and defense? Because that's the real telling tale for Alabama, is owning the line of scrimmage and dominating on both those lines of scrimmage, on both sides of the ball.
We got to start asking ourselves here too, Fresh. I mean, how many more years does Nick Saban have? You look at he's technically right now. Frank Solich at Ohio University retired a year ago. He was 76. He was the oldest coach in the country. Mac Brown is the oldest coach in the country over there at North Carolina. But people forget Mac Brown was retired for what, 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, 5 or 6 years off.
And then Saban's number 2. He's over 70 now. He'll be 71 during this season. Alabama's going to have to eventually start thinking of an exit strategy there, because you don't, especially a school like Alabama, you don't want to see any type of drop off of these teams. This is a very good Alabama team. This is a very, very good Alabama team. Is it as good as some of these championship teams that went toe to toe against Clemson? I don't know. I want to see what happens with these wide receivers. I want to see how they handle with 5 very, very tough road games. Like, they don't have an easy road game. Like, they don't play Vanderbilt on the road. They don't play Missouri on the road. They play Texas, Arkansas, Tennessee, LSU, and Ole Miss all on the road. Those are all tough games, man. Alabama, I love Alabama fans. I really do, because your expectation is to win a national title every single year. And I love a fan that has that level of expectation. If you want your team to be an elite level team, you got to hold that level of expectation in your mindset at all times, or at least to the playoffs. You can say playoffs are bust, like you said for Ohio State. This could be a special Alabama team. This could also be a team that, what if they don't gel? What if they don't come together? What if we see, dare I say, Alabama lose 2, and this would be news if Alabama loses 2 regular season games? I don't know. I don't bet against Nick Saban. I'm going to say that they're going to run the table in this gauntlet of a schedule and wind up in Atlanta, maybe a 1-loss team in Atlanta there. But also, I'm not going to be floored. I'm not going to be like clutching my pearls or anything here. Like, oh my goodness, how in the world did Alabama ever lose 2 football games? It's a real possibility. To me, they're the best They're the best team in the country right now to start off this season.
Yeah, I mean, it's a program that's built. I mean, I think the worst recruiting class he's had in the past 5 years is number 3 overall, consensus through 24/7 Sports. You're not getting slouches to come in and play, and he's developing guys. And the coaches that he rotates in, like Sarkisian was offensive coordinator for a while, Lane Kiffin was offensive coordinator, Dayball is now, like, those are 3 head coaches for 3 of the biggest brands not, I don't say Ole Miss is a huge brand, but you have a coach of the New York Giants, you have the head coach of Texas, head coach of Ole Miss, all were offensive coordinators for him. He rotates guys in. They function. Right now, you have